We are very fortunate today to have with us John Hewa, who is the CEO of the nation's largest electric co-op. I don't think we've ever had a keynote speaker from a co-op before. We've had munis and investor-owned utilities. We've had government people, but it's great, and we feel very lucky to have the perspective of somebody who's running a co-op, let alone the biggest co-op in the nation. It serves the beautiful hill country. You saw the area of the Pedernales Co-op if you saw the movie Boyhood. A lot of scenes filmed out there. John Hewa is, as I say, the CEO of the Pedernales Co-op. He's also heavily involved in a number of industry associations, including the Solar Electric Power Association, the National Rural Electric Co-op Association, and the American Public Power Association. He is an engineer by training and holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in engineering from the other UT, the University of Tennessee. So please join me in welcoming John Hewa.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. Just thrilled with the chance to talk a little bit about electric co-ops. My goals for the day are to make sure that you understand what's happening amongst America's electric co-ops, to give you an update about Pedernales Electric Co-op for any members that might be in the room, to talk a little bit about where we see the industry going, a little bit of the work that's happening at the Solar Electric Power Association as well. Had the distinct privilege of having served NRECA's national network. I spent 2 years running a national research program. Not the kind of research that's happening at universities, necessarily more of an applied research, applying these technologies to the grid. We see the National Co-op Network as a very real living laboratory. Today with me also is Dr. Peter Mahoro. Peter is the Director of Research and Energy Strategies at Pedernales. He's joined us about 8 months ago, and I wanted to make sure that folks knew that Peter was in the room here. Very thankful for the skills that he's bringing to our cooperative. Today, if you look at the national network, over 900 co-ops covering more than 70% of the land mass of the United States. A couple million, 2.5 million miles of power lines, and it requires great capital and investment in order to keep these systems going. Co-ops are required to spend more dollars, pound for pound, are faced with serious rural exposure, and it's very interesting how the technology opportunities and the changing landscape, a more distributed landscape, I believe is going to play out very, very favorably in the electric co-op space. The principles that we adhere to are the same today as they've been over the years. We have a very diverse membership with a high degree of expectations. Our members are our owners. I think that's important to understand in terms of the co-op model. And we operate on highly democratic principles, making sure that our membership has a clear and conscientious voice. We've got to serve everyone from the family in the lower corner to this gentleman, and they may have very, very different expectations of their co-op. Now, how does this model look nationally? On a national level, co-ops fare very well in terms of the American Customer Satisfaction Index. We score higher than IOUs that are serving about 80% of the industry. Our model is a very tough model. We have a much lower density, or much lower size. Our size is more similar to the municipal market, very small in comparison to the averages for the larger IOUs in the nation. In terms of consumers per mile, a huge difference here in the way we think about distributed energy and technologies. How these technologies pencil out is very different in an environment with 7 accounts on average per mile versus a high density arrangement. I've had the opportunity to be a municipal system manager. Also, I've spent my first 10 or 15 years of my career as in the municipal side, and I was a utilities manager at the city of Manassas, Virginia, a very high density system outside of the D.C. area. So I'm familiar with that model as well. Our revenue per mile is much lower, although the dollar and the capital and the maintenance investment per consumer is much higher. So this creates a very challenging environment. If you look back over 77 years now, at the founding of Pedernales, today the nation's largest distribution co-op in the nation, then Congressman Lyndon B. Johnson, instrumental in working with local ranchers to secure the first loans from the federal government to allow rural electrification in our region. Today, our system has grown to a massive utility in terms of the electric co-op space. We're serving over 266,000 accounts today, growing at a rapid rate. Our revenues are in the $620 million range. We are operating on a base of about 720 employees with a lot of support from some of the nation's strongest consultants and contractors. If you look back at 2014, we're knocking right on the door of 5.4 billion kilowatt hours. We're experiencing over 9,000 meters of growth, serving some of the nation's fastest growing counties, as reported by Forbes late last year and in 2013. We're serving the regions around Austin and bumping into regions to the north and west of San Antonio. And our sustained growth at this point is close to 4%, over 3.9% growth. Last year, we don't see that slowing down anytime soon. I can assure you we are not searching for our next megawatt hour or kilowatt hour of sales. In fact, as a wires company, as a distribution co-op, I believe that model fares very, very well in terms of the way we intersect with technologies. Distributed generation is not a threat to us. We own and operate a wires system. If we are delivering wires, energy, and electrons from central station service down to the meter, that's fantastic. If we are delivering energy from one consumer across our grid to another consumer, that's fantastic. If we are supporting our members, our owners, in new technologies to ease and help and advance the implementation, that is a wonderful outcome, and that's part of our purpose. Our territory is approximately the size of the state of Massachusetts. It is bifurcated into two different territories. And you might imagine there's a few challenges that come with this. The Eastern Territory, bumping into Austin and San Antonio, about 16 accounts per mile. Some of our districts are above 8% sustained growth in that territory. Our Western Territory, 2 accounts per mile. So we've got about 4,000 miles, 21,000 miles of line in total, about 4,000 miles of those line and 8,000 consumers in our Western Territory. So when we look at technology systems, we look at small wind, rooftop photovoltaics, and other emerging technologies. We see them playing out very, very differently. And I want to make sure we cover some of that today. Now, before we get into a discussion about where this is going from the co-op perspective, I think it's important, particularly for PEC, for me to take just one moment and check in on the health of the co-op. This is our members' co-op. The co-op is in great shape. We have favorable ratios in terms of declining costs. We have favorable ratios in terms of increased efficiency per employee. We are underway. I see Chris Steffenberg here. We're underway with a cost of service study with Burns McDonnell. We've lowered rates twice already. We'll have our third rate reduction May 1. That's 3 reductions in 6 months, and we're not finished. In fact, we're just getting started. Our reliability, I would put up with any utility, much less electric co-op in the nation. Our average outage time per consumer last year was about 47.5 minutes. So when we look at 8,760 hours in a year to be counting reliability for a still rural utility system, counting that in minutes and well under an hour is a great, great feat of accomplishment. We're doing a lot of foundational work. We're putting in new mapping and new infrastructure in terms of establishing very precise underpinnings of the utility so that we are prepared for a much more surgical operation of the grid in the days ahead. We're doing this both operationally and in terms of the assets. We've outfitted 400 of our trucks with vehicle tracking technologies, so we have better control over how we're operating the system. We're, in some cases, covering the fundamentals in new ways in terms of making sure the cash register of the utility is in check. We're doing a lot of work to help our members with energy services, and we've just recently began working with Honeywell and going to be bringing in some of their tools to help our energy services staff work at a higher level in terms of the sophistication with our membership. Regarding lighting, we are working in directions of conservation and night skies compliance, converting many of our lights to LED to reduce our energy consumption. And we happen to be the first co-op in the nation to have entered into a pole attachment agreement with Google for their fiber deployment. We're anxious to see Google bring their services to our region. Our workforce, very strong, 720 employees today, pulling down top ranks and top awards in terms of our line worker capabilities at the rodeos, and we've now begun to reach out and do some work with NRECA's international program. We just had a team that got back from Haiti helping with electrification in that part of the world. So we're very proud of our team and the work that they're doing. In the final stage of kind of checking in on the health of the co-op, later this year we're going to be ushering in some new internal tools and technologies. A rapid electronic work order and tracking system, which will be at the fingertips of our employees, and we'll be introducing a complete mobile suite in terms of our member billing and customer interface. This is very, very important in the ERCOT market. Certainly, the world has gone mobile. Certainly, we get that. But in our space, we're seeing a need to be able to interact very dynamically, very fast, very firmly with our membership. This platform is paving the way for us to introduce new rates, more dynamic and time-oriented rates, but very importantly, the notification capabilities. We have to do a very, very good job at being able to inform our members what's happening in the real-time ERCOT market. In this state, we are leaders in energy production, and we are leaders in energy consumption in terms of the growing demand. And the demand for electricity is certainly on the rise. You've heard about the number of accounts that we've added to our system. Ironically, we're still looking, our co-op is still referencing an August of 2011 peak. We've added probably 40,000 accounts since that time frame, 30 to 40,000 accounts, and we're still talking about a peak that occurred in 2011. So some concerns over what those peaks going forward will look like. How much of a role has energy efficiency played? How much of a role has distributed generation played? And what will we see if we're faced with those types of weather scenarios again? In Texas, we use energy very differently than the rest of the nation. You'll see that residential, we're predominantly a residential utility, although we have a lot of growing commercial demand. You'll see that residential in Texas is 13% as compared to about 22% around the rest of the nation. You would think that we use less energy. We don't. Actually, our average consumption is rather high, one of the top states in terms of average consumption per household. And so at the co-op today, we're in the 1,200 to 1,300 kWh range per month per residential consumer. Now, in the ERCOT market, what I find most notable and most interesting from our perspective about the market, and we have seen the pricing be quite soft here recently. I know there's some ERCOT folks in the room, but this is what, and this is not a typo on this graph, this is what we're looking at for this June. And when we were developing the slide, my team, we wanted to put a little amplitude to this. I said, no, just let it scale out. Let the scale be what the scale is. Normal price of electricity, let's say $35 a megawatt hour. It could be much lower. It could be higher, but let's just call that an average. And June 1, we have a price cap that will be set at up to $9,000. And we've seen some price cap hits in the last couple of years. This has a very profound impact on the kinds of decisions that we make on wholesale energy. It has a huge impact on how we see new technologies coming to bear. Along with this type of possibility and this range of scenarios, we've seen our transmission cost essentially double in the last decade. We're now spending about $50 million a year out of our $620 million in revenues. Actually, about 56 of that is going to transmission cost. That's based on 4 15-minute intervals. What's happening to our system for 15 minutes in June, 15 minutes in July, August, and September. That scenario brings in invoices to us and expenses to our member consumers on the order of $56 million. So you take those realities along with our energy-only market and the ranges that we could see, and it has a big impact on the kinds of decisions that we have to make as a member-owned co-op. LCRA is our primary energy provider. We're required, at least for the next many years, to have at least 65% of our energy coming from LCRA under current contract. We have been diversifying that and working with others in the state of Texas. But when you look at these possibilities, it has a big impact on these decisions. How much exposure do you want in the market? How much exposure do you avoid? and how do you shape new power supply arrangements to make sure that we're bringing the best of the market and the best of firm delivery to our membership. Regarding our energy footprint, today the co-op has a renewable energy goal to achieve 30% of its capacity by 2020. So we are on track for that. We're working closely with our power suppliers. Today we're at about 22% combined capacity. Much of that is coming through wind for the South Trent wind project, and some of that energy is also coming through our relationship with LCRA, albeit that the hydro capacity hasn't produced a lot of energy units in the last few years. So that is a concern. I don't know which way the wind's going to blow or the rain's going to fall on that one, but there's some resource there that we'd like to see it put to better use, but that's out of our hands at this moment. We are conducting, again, with Burns & McDonnell, an integrated resource plan. We'll be unveiling that to our membership later this spring, and then working to make sure that our members understand the kinds of energy and technology decisions that we're going to be making, that will be before us in the years ahead. So if you look back at where we've been over the last 100 years, actually, the video we showed at the front of this, the infrastructure that's in the ground and in the air today doesn't look a whole lot different. It's actually pretty recognizable compared to some of the stuff you saw in that early video. So it's a really interesting how this industry, how co-ops, munis, and IOUs alike have what has been achieved with the economics of the delivery system, where we've taken central station service, and how we've used essentially the same building blocks. We've scaled and scaled and scaled the same building blocks, and in some cases our organizations have done the same. And today we're seeing those building blocks begin to change very rapidly. And I'm here to tell you, I think this plays out very, very well in rural America for a lot of reasons. What do we see happening? What is my perspective on where we're heading? Well, we've got a wave of new expectations. We've got growing expectations from our members. We've talked about reliability. We've been lowering rates. Our members expect new levels of service and new optionality in the decisions that we present them with and the options. We've got new technology powered by advances in telecommunication and computing. We've got new or emerging or evolving markets, I would say still, such as the one we might be in. And we've got new regulations, everything from the Clean Power Plan to other regional haze and other regulations at a federal level that have state impacts. So with the wave of new expectations comes a wave of new grid technologies. A lot of what's being discussed at this conference. Everything from solar at the micro and macro scale to synchrophasers, advanced telecommunication nodes on our distribution systems. These are not transmission-only solutions. Big data solutions, energy storage, microgrid, combined heat and power, and who knows what's next. And we merge that from a utilities perspective with what we see as a wave of consumer technologies. Everything from plug-in electric vehicles to programmable thermostats and programmable and smart appliances. And we take that even to the level of intelligent building systems and a new wave of location-based services. And we bring those together and we start to see a grid and an energy supply that looks very, very different. We're making different power supply decisions as Texas leads the nation in wind, of course, and is emerging very, very rapidly. We're seeing some unbelievable prices at the wholesale level for wind and solar. Our grid is becoming more distributed. We're overlaying more technology on our systems, and we're using our grid in different ways. And that will only grow into the future. And the business services and the horsepower we're putting underneath the hood, if you will, is evolving pretty rapidly as well. We're moving to cloud-based solutions. We're moving to much more dynamic solutions and the ability to make sure we're communicating very rapidly with our membership. What do our members tell us they want? They want improved self-service. They want to be able to do more with their information, more with their account. They want immediate responsiveness, whether it's the state of the grid, energy supply, pricing, the status of an outage. They want very specific, very tangible, actionable information about their energy supply, be it commercial, industrial, or residential. And they want a much higher level of knowledge and control. These are the principles and the foundations that we're working to deliver on right now in the decisions that we make going forward. I mentioned earlier that I have the privilege of serving on the Solar Electric Power Association Board of Directors. And I think it's interesting when you look at the onset and the evolution of solar energy. One of my favorite graphics to take a look at here is this breakdown. Yellow is in residential and blue is in commercial. You've got green as utility scale. And as you look over a multiple year period, you see that there's certainly a kind of a lagging factor here in terms of when utilities really have started to kick in. And of course today we're seeing massive investment in utility scale photovoltaics. But I think there's a lesson learned here in terms of the way that our consumers have been leading in terms of residential and commercial. And I think we ought to be introspective on our maturity in this space and the timing at which we're starting to really kick in and bring solutions to bear and really begin to support our consumers. Dr. Mahoro's here in the room. One of the things that we worked on together, and he authored a grant at the federal level. Co-ops are doing a lot of work around the country on advanced grid. And they're doing a lot of work around the nation on photovoltaics. I want to spend just a few minutes talking about that. One of those projects is the GEARED proposal, an effort where co-ops have worked with the Department of Energy's Sunshot program to work with a consortium of universities across the country in preparing new curriculum to enable our future leaders and our folks that are going to be in the energy space. A real good example of a national trade association and the research program, which we both spent time in, a real good example of the power of co-ops at a national level, working with the national laboratories and working with university systems. A similar project that we are participating in now, also born out of our national co-op research program, the Cooperative Research Network, is an effort with the Department of Energy called SUNDAY, Solar Utility Network Deployment Acceleration. SUNDAY is all about taking utility-scale solar, whether it's utility-owned, utility-scale, or whether it's community-owned, utility-scale, and accelerating the deployment of that technology. Instead of having 900 utilities figure this out and reinvent the wheel, so to speak, SUNDAY is about helping seed the information in those engineering departments and in the mindsets of those leaders to help them understand what's the footprint, what are the approximate costs, what are some design templates that could help launch a utility in this direction. And that program even involves a national procurement arm, which is making inverters and panels and other gear available in a prepackaged discount environment. And electric co-ops are stepping up to the plate. A number of electric co-ops today are beginning to deploy utility-scale solar, and a particular focus in our world on the community-scale version. At PEC, we're working on just the same. We are working today to develop a community solar project or a series of community solar projects, and we anticipate allowing our members to subscribe to those. Our goal is to allow our members to have access to the economy of scale that a utility scale project brings, and to address the membership that may not want to make the long-term commitment to rooftop, or the membership that doesn't have a rooftop that is suitable, which is about 70% of homes that may not be suitable. And we want to make sure that we have a utility-centric solution to help them in terms of their investment. We believe we can be a broker of sorts in terms of those transactions. We can bring that economy of scale, that centralization, and we can actually deploy these systems on our grid where they make sense in terms of the cost of land and the integration. Speaking of rooftop and speaking of our membership, the drivers are certainly well known in this room, but I feel very confident that in rural America in general and across our territory, that the driver of self-sufficiency is going to play out in a huge way in terms of the adoption of rooftop photovoltaics. This is a picture from our recent solar tour. We held our solar tour the last couple of years. We've had a couple of hundred members that have convened and now beginning to bring in vendors and talk about what the co-op is doing to support members and allow members to change their ideas and their concepts around rooftop residential and commercial solar. The principles that we're operating on moving forward, and I thought it might be relevant to the group, and you notice I've listed avoiding cross-subsidy. In our boardroom and what we hear from our members, we have tremendous enthusiasm about rooftop and behind-the-meter PV. And we have also folks that talk about and are concerned about subsidy. And we're working to bring those two mindsets together to develop programs that we believe are going to satisfy all of our membership. How do we be a strong supporter? Again, we're not in this for the sale of the kilowatt hour and the megawatt hour. We're a distribution utility. How do we support our membership in ways that the co-op brings scale and expertise and other partners to the scene to make sure that we are enabling and advancing distributed generation? We have seen, of course, an uptick, as you would imagine, and we expect 2015 and certainly 2016 to be banner years in terms of consumer investment on our territory. We are in the process, and our board of directors recently approved the implementation of an on-bill financing platform. We've looked at rebates, and we've looked at other options. And yes, we think we have a way to help our membership in terms of community solar. But when we get down to the behind-the-meter solution, where can the power of the co-op really intersect with the membership? We believe that is in terms of on-bill financing. We have access to very low interest capital. We have the ability to, we send out power bills every month. We send out a notification. We have folks that do credit checks. We have member service teams. We have a renewable and distributed energy manager. We have all the folks and all the resources that we need. And one of the final steps that we believe could be very successful is the implementation of an on-bill financing program. If you were to take a 7 kW system at about $2.80 a watt, that's about a $19,500 investment, and you were to look at a 10-year loan term, we believe that the financing that we could make available could reduce the total ownership cost by as much as $3,000. It still allows our member, whether commercial or residential, to gain access to tax credits. We believe this is a model that survives beyond any kind of tax credit or subsidy. It's a model that internally is equitable because it doesn't put any pressure on other parts of the co-op, and it's doing what we do best, which is using the power of our membership convening to make to advance the delivery and production of electricity. So we see this as a model that is very appropriate for the type of utility that we are. We believe it will be a model that will be seen as a great addition to the vendor community. We're in a part of the country with a really strong community of installers. So at this point, we don't see a need for our co-op to get in that space. We see a need to help connect members to the resources that are going to allow them to advance their own goals and initiatives. In much the way that we're working to help our membership, we're deeply involved, and I have the privilege of serving on the board of directors of the Solar Electric Power Association. And SEPA is if you're not familiar with SEPA, I'll just take one moment to explain a little bit of the work that SEPA is doing, because I think it's very important to the folks in this room. SEPA is the place where utilities and the industry intersect. SEPA is doing a lot of work in terms of trying to cut through any of the controversies that have existed historically or traditionally between consumers, the solar industry, and the industry. And today, SEPA's membership is quite strong. Look at that. 93% of installed U.S. solar capacity is through SEPA-oriented member utilities. Utility membership and industry membership, and that's the key takeaway here. Those groups are convening, and a lot of great work is coming out of this. A lot of very tangible reports. Some date back even a few years now, but a primer to the value and the arrangements of net electricity metering, a topic that folks in this room well have mastered, but is a topic that in terms of lawmakers, regulatory bodies, still one of the most popular reports because it brings in a lot of fundamentals. Other work on the integration of solar and the challenges that are being faced and overcome, locational placement of solar, and these reports and these initiatives are designed with utility input, they're designed with consumer input, and very importantly, they're designed with industry input. And I think that's what makes the work that SEPA is doing today very, very tangible. Helping utilities understand what's happening around them, in the space around them, and other installations, who's doing what, when, where, what's it costing, and even fact-finding missions, both domestically and international. The last thing I'll say about the work of SEPA, I think, is one of the most important things that's underway right now. SEPA, late last year, convened a call for interest from all parties, from the national trade associations, EEI, APPA, NRECA, from industry, from think tanks, from consultants, a call for concepts regarding the 51st state, a new energy paradigm that is sustainable, to take away and say, if we didn't have the markets we had today, and if we didn't have some of the constraints that we have today, and you were building this from the ground up, what would this look like? How would we design a new grid going forward? What would be the role of distributed energy resources? And how would we cut through the controversy and design this in a way that is sustainable, that intersects with all parties of all interest, and creates win-win scenarios? So with that, I'll close here. We got a lot going on in this co-op, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity today to tell you a little bit about what we're working on. In terms of our core business, in terms of where we're heading with new technologies, and certainly in the enthusiasm that we have, and I hope you can see that enthusiasm, the interest that we have in doing a really solid job of helping our membership meet their goals and advance clean energy initiatives here at the co-op. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I look forward to the rest of the event, and certainly ready to answer any questions if there are any from the folks here. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Can we get questioners to use the microphone? Sure.
Thank you. My name is Parviz Adib. I want to congratulate you and your team. I'm very familiar with your success, and I think you have achieved a lot with your team.
Thank you.
That said, you know there are almost 78, 80 co-ops operating in Texas.
Absolutely.
A major difference between many of them and Pedernales is you are serving a lot of affluent and wealthy communities, and many of those co-ops really do not have that privilege. To what extent that has been a factor in your success? And if yes, to what extent can you convince other cooperatives who do not have that kind of customers to do similar things?
Absolutely. Great question. First of all, the disparities in the co-op space, and I've been in the muni space as well, the disparities are large in terms of resources, size, and scale, and staff. And so we are fortunate to have a certain scale of resources to allow us to do things in a different way. We're pursuing federal grants. In fact, we're working with this UT on pursuing some federal grants right now. And we have the ability to do those kinds of things at our co-op. This really goes back to what's happening at our national trade associations. I spent a few years running the co-op national research program, and the basic premise of that program was to help and is to help utilities connect and intersect with beneficial technologies. Some of these organizations may not have engineering staff. Some may. Some may have large, some may have small. To help those organizations avoid technology pitfalls so they're not replicated, to intersect the beneficial technologies, and to draw out of that. Now, beyond that intelligence that comes from that kind of approach, similar to what SEPA is doing, there are some very tangible things that need to happen. One of those is like the solar utility network acceleration, being able to deliver at least a preliminary design. It doesn't include local environmental or permitting, but to be able to deliver at least a preliminary design to a CEO or a GM or an engineering director at a utility to get them started in the direction of a deployment. As the cost of these community and utility scale systems and the behind the scale systems continue to drop, I would encourage you to think about the very rural landscapes that we serve. What may be different about our territory and other Texas co-ops is, in fact, the landscape. So you've got longer lines with more significant maintenance, heavier voltage drop, heavier cost per mile, greater reliability concerns, and the need for end-of-line voltage support. So when I think about, and we're in fact beginning to look at small-scale behind-the-meter energy storage, we've got line extensions in our western territory that we're looking at that we think, well, I may be able to defer that asset. I may be able to avoid that asset entirely with the boost that we could get from an energy storage system, or potentially an energy storage system in concert with a renewable energy system. So yes, we do serve a certain type of membership in our region, but I believe that when you look at how, in the long haul, how distributed energy plays out in the most rural parts of our territory, I think the play there is actually as big, if not bigger, and those folks have the real estate to invest. We're seeing systems get bigger and bigger on our territory. We're seeing a lot of ranchers, a lot of barns, a lot of ground-mounted systems. We're beginning to see that at a much bigger scale than we saw just a few years ago.
Daniel Kirschen from the University of Washington.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned early in your presentation that you have two parts of your system.
Yes.
And they seem to have relatively different characteristics.
Very different. Yes.
How do you, as a co-op, ensure fairness between the two parts of your system?
Absolutely. Great question. So, the assets of the cooperative are governed by our board of directors. They have a fiduciary care responsibility across all assets, all programs, and all interests of the co-op. And yes, we do see a markedly different capital intensity in certain parts of our territory. We are required to have, non-discriminatory rates. So we, from a regulatory standpoint, we begin with that. But beyond that, part of the co-op model is seeing out for the rest of the co-op territory. We do work to avoid subsidy. We did have to change our facility extension fees a few years ago to make sure that we weren't overspending in areas that required longer extensions. So we've made some structural changes to our rate base to ensure that we're not overextending on a facility extension. Now, today, our fixed fees do remain constant across our entire network. That's why we're working with folks like Burns and McDonnell to come in, do a cost of service study, and take a fresh new look at what those numbers might pencil out to be. Yes, sir.
I'm Dr. Gus Lott with YARCOM. I actually happen to live 2 miles north of the Pedernales River Bridge, just north of Johnson City.
All right.
So,
Yeah.
in all of the activities and incentives, or whether you call them incentives or not, in your strategic planning, at what year do you think the rural community will not just have knowledge, but begin to act on that knowledge?
Absolutely. I see that happening right now. I mean, we're putting in systems today that are going to be, I think, very much advance the ball in terms of our legacy platforms. I see this happening all across the country. I do see a lot of action. A lot of co-ops have been early adopters of smaller scale. Maybe not the largest scale systems that you're seeing across the country, but they've been early adopters and have embraced themes like community solar very early. I do believe that the research work and the application of those technologies, as that's happening, one of the things that you're beginning to see and gain a lot of momentum in the co-op space is a completely different tone and a completely different theme than we may have seen even 2 or 3 years ago. I'm very thankful to start to see that tone of conversation. I think it's the right tone of conversation, and I believe that you'll see electric co-ops in every regard step up to the plate and find ways to make sure they're supporting technologies in general, but specifically rooftop and other distributed generation. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry.
I'll be right over there
Okay.
1 second.
Sure. Dave Tuttle, University of Texas.
Dave.
Great work.
Yes, sir.
With your 4 CP expenses for the transmission and the $9,000 system-wide offer cap, can you describe some more your DR programs, what you're putting in place, and are you using peak shaving rebates, or what's the tariff structure to encourage that, as well as the hardware investments?
Okay. So we have a fairly traditional rate structure right now, and we are working on some time-oriented rates. We're putting in the foundational
programs to allow us to do better notifications to members. We expect to have, at a minimum, a time of use block rate. We are looking at a buy-sell tariff for solar photovoltaics. Right now we have a net energy metering system. It is, I think, a pretty healthy net energy metering system. We've 70% increase this past year in the avoided cost. So we're reaching back and modifying and updating some equities that need to be there in our business model. What's interesting in Texas for us, and what I'm seeing amongst others, is because we don't have the capacity market, and because of the energy-only market, I believe that it's having a pretty big impact on actual demand response investment. It's difficult for us to know exactly what's going to pencil out. We're really excited about energy storage because the right characteristic of battery can either be emergency response system, it can be some other form of ancillary services, it can be standby, or it can be energy arbitrage, which starts to get more predictable. So one of the reasons we're pursuing some federal opportunities and federal grants regarding energy storage is because we believe that's going to be the flavor of the best technology for us moving forward. It fits in a rural environment because of the rural exposure and the reliability issues, particularly on the fringe of our network. It fits because it provides voltage support at the end of the line. It fits because we have higher line losses than a really compact environment. So I envision energy storage as one of our primary technologies. In addition to that, right now we are working on some discussions with some of the major manufacturers about programmable thermostats and active, demand response type programs, but we do not have a legacy program installed at this point. Yes.
John, this has been a fabulous talk, and it's really
Thank
great
you.
to hear from a very progressive distribution-level co-op.
Thank you very much.
You spent time as well at the NRECA, and in Minnesota we have a lot of rural co-ops which span the range,
Yeah.
from people pushing the envelope to those holding on to it fast and beating you when you talk to them. Could you talk a little bit about some of the political
Yes.
risks? Right? You're in a system that's growing
glad
quickly,
to.
that's not others, but across, because you're so politically powerful as well.
Would be glad to. The value, the mindset, and the momentum that comes out of the national trade associations is absolutely critical. I spent a lot of years with American Public Power folks working for a couple municipal systems. I did spend 5 years on a G&T board in Florida, and I was a co-op manager as well. So I've worked in a few different states, the Southeast, the Northeast, and here in Texas. Really, going back and looking at kind of the mentality of the associations, one of the concerns that I've held is that we've got to get beyond any kind of protective thinking. One of the benefits that we have that may be a little bit different than some of the other co-ops is that we are not a G&T affiliated co-op. A lot of the distribution co-ops, in fact, most of the distribution co-ops across the country, just as the members banded together to build co-ops banded together to build G&Ts that were co-ops of co-ops. That model is a little more tricky and difficult in terms of megawatt-hour sales because they have an equity stake in the generation assets. And that is a different model than we at Pedernales have right now. We, I think, have the good fortune in this case of being non-G&T affiliated. The direction of the energy flows is rather irrelevant, notwithstanding any reliability concerns. That is a big principle. So the G&T community is a community that is beginning to change its mindset as well. It's happening maybe slower than some would like, but it is happening, and it is happening well at this point. And I do believe you're going to see, just as you saw in that SEPA graph, you saw that the utility inertia started kicking in, and you see large-scale systems. At the rates we're seeing now, I mean, we're talking about solar in the 4 to 5 cent range easily, and we're seeing wind in the 2 to 3 cent range easily on the wholesale level. I think those prices become really somewhat undeniable in terms of pure economics.
If your system is growing, but not if it's
Not so much. I mean, there's going to be replacement energy. There's going to be, and as it begins to get more in focus behind the meter, then utilities are going to start to change, and you're seeing this happen. They're going to start to change that cost structure, that rate structure. Certainly, we want to make sure that we have a rate structure that's conducive to behind-the-meter investment. Other utilities are looking at what that fixed charge ought to be. That's a very controversial topic around the country. So I believe these utilities will find ways to further and embrace solutions, but also cover their cost and make sure that they're earning enough return on investment to keep the organization healthy.
I'm going to intervene there. Please
Great.
join me in thanking John.
Thank you. David, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thank you.